Hello everyone, my name is Blackwatch and welcome to another episode of my Siege lore series. If you enjoy this series and you want to see more, like, subscribe, share, all the usual stuff would be much appreciated. If you want to see this story for yourself, I want to recommend you to go to the Rainbow Six website, click on Game Info and then Media, scroll down and you'll find all of the illustrated stories for Siege as of today, released, collated and waiting for you to dive in. There's plenty of lore snippets and other things in there that I may not have covered. I also may have covered, but it's nice to see it yourself. And this one is no exception. So please do go check these out and let me know what you think. The implication of this next chapter of Siege's storyline is very wide and hard to pin down so far. In the previous video, or a previous video, I discussed what happened during the Vector Glare anime, where Sense, Lion and Montagna went on an operation led by Doc and Twitch to rescue a Nighthaven architect, or at least an architect who was associated with Nighthaven, had something to do with the construction of Nighthaven's HQ in Singapore, which may end up being a map in Season 4, but we'll wait and see whether that comes to fruition. Now that architect has been secured, Rainbow have the intel that they required to move on Nighthaven in some capacity. Now we discover in this story that capacity is not a strictly offensive one, but it is one in which the new squad-based system of Rainbow kind of gets in the way of what Sense was hoping to achieve in Team Rainbow. Particularly, Wolfguard is no longer involved. Their job's done in terms of minimising collateral and making sure that the innocents are safe in this particular mission, the innocent being the architect. The next step of the plan is entirely focused on the espionage and infiltration aspect of Rainbow, and that is Caveira's team, which currently doesn't have a name. Now the intention of the mission, using the blueprints that they managed to secure from the architect, was to go on site and download data from a secure server. On that secure server they have things including the QCR inventory, and that intelligence would give them the scope to connect the dodgy equipment that was given to the assassins directly with Nighthaven and incriminate them in his murder. Obviously we still don't know if this is actually the narrative. It's what's being suggested so far, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something more to this. But anyway, we discover that the only way they can hack this server is to be on site, and that's why they have Caveira's team getting involved. Now this doesn't sit very well with Sense, and Sense protests during the briefing and basically asks to be involved because they know that the architect is still going to be there, and they have a concern regarding the way that Caveira's team is going to utilise the architect as an asset in this situation. This is enough to convince Doc to let them go, and so the team is formed, and it is made of Nokk, the architect himself, and Sense. So they dispatch to Singapore to the Nighthaven HQ. Now we've seen the Nighthaven HQ before. We've seen it on Harry's board. There was a night vision photograph that we believe Valkyrie had acquired during an intel mission she was sent on to gather information about Nighthaven's operations in Singapore in general. We've also seen it in an illustrated story in the past, and we've seen it in an anime as well. I believe it was the Crystal Guard anime that we saw the HQ, and this was when Osa was driving around on her buggy thing and Ace was being an asshole. So we've seen it, and we know what it looks like, and we also know that they have other facilities in Singapore, or at least that's the implication based off Harry's board. There's one that was pinpointed to the south of the area, but it wasn't anything resembling the HQ. It was in a much more built-up urban area, whereas the HQ is seemingly more isolated. It's next to a number of small islets that are just not in this area that we had pinpointed within Singapore large. I don't know what the area was, but it was very urbanized, very modern looking, definitely not the hidden jungle base that the Nighthaven HQ actually is. So they move on that, they manage to get on board with Nighthaven gear and move in towards the facility. Now they get stopped near the front, and they're stopped by none other than Ace, the existing Nighthaven member, and our beloved betrayer, pulse. So it's nice to see him again, being a snake. But anyway, gets into a bit of a hairy situation because the architect starts getting questions that he doesn't seem to have a very smooth answer for, and is only able to divert this particular interrogation by mentioning a volleyball field that Ace was wanting to be built at the Nighthaven HQ, and he essentially used that as a bribe to get him to move on and stay quiet. And so they get through. And this is where things become interesting, because while Sense is there, they notice that there are some trucks that seem to be a bit suspicious and maybe a bit too convenient, but you know, they could end up being something to do with the equipment that was shipped out. There are a good number of trucks, and that's why Sense notices it, but Nokk is very keen to stay on task, and so the task continues. They move to one of the side doors. Unfortunately, the architect has had his credentials revoked, and so cannot gain access to the facility, which is when a conveniently placed Nighthaven guard arrives and is knocked unconscious by Nokk, and after knocked unconscious, his hand is then used to access the place. This is the point where the team splits up. Nokk enters the facility on her own and begins her mission to try and retrieve the data, and Sense and the architect disappear into the sunset, literally. What sort of implications does this have for the story going forward? Now, to me, it seems almost like a prelude to two possibilities. Now, the fact that the map is coming in Season 4 gives us a bit of time to establish what's really happening here. The fact that the map is coming at all and could potentially be Nighthaven HQ suggests to me that there is going to be a battle between between Team Rainbow and Nighthaven. But we still don't know for certain. There's too many open threads here in this particular storyline. Certainly too many for me to make a conclusive call. This is definitely what we're leaning towards. It's what I think they're trying to convince us is going to be the case. But I really think there's more to it than this cut and dry good and evil narrative. I think there's perhaps some sort of rogue faction within Nighthaven that's exploiting them and is doing these things without Callie's knowledge. Or it could well be that there's actually someone within Rainbow who's coordinating with Nighthaven to cause problems. There's all sorts of things that could be happening. All we know for sure is that there's been an uptick in the amount of crime internationally. Things in general in the world seem to be more and more unstable, and the ground is kind of laid for a company like Nighthaven to really muscle itself into a strong position. So that's what we're left with. It could go either way. Again, the amount of time that we have between this revelation that this mission is taking place and Rainbow are now acting directly against Nighthaven, and the fact that there is also the scope for this to maybe end in a more peaceable way. It's really down to you to give your own interpretation of what you think is happening. I think we're going to end up with an all-out conflict, but I'm not certain how that's going to play out, and I think there's going to be an element of me having a broken voice, and also an element of things just being a little bit more muddy than we might think. I think there's going to be some shadow actors involved in this particular play that we're not going to see until it's maybe too late. But that's just my take on things. I'm not too keen to jump into the cut and dry narrative of Nighthaven bad, Rainbow good, as much as that's the one that sits nicely with me in terms of my moral convictions, because Nighthaven, a big nasty PMC. I still think that there's too much to the characters in Nighthaven to just paint them in such a villainous way. So I think there's something going on, is what I'm trying to say, is what I've said repeatedly, but I don't know for sure what. So tune in next time when we have more information. Until then, I'm going to be taking a few steps back into the past of Siege, and we're going to be looking at some stuff that you may not know, or you may know, and if you do know, then I suppose you can just stop watching the video midway through. I'd be very upset, because I like it when you watch my videos. Anyway, until the next one, apologies for the slightly rambly style, but I tried to script this one, and it was either too short or too serious. So I felt like this was a better way to approach it. Do pobачення, everybody. Bye-bye.